la mondon venis nova sento, tra la mondo iras forta voco, per flugiloi de facila vento, lunge loco flugo.
Saluton and bonvenon to Castperanto, the Esperanto podcast where we examine movies, literature, and other media that use our favorite conlang, Esperanto. I'm your host, mi nomias Aaron, and I'm joined by my co-host, Jacob Gulliver.
Dankon pro mi vien spektaklo. Mi tre exitas paroli pri unu el malmultaj filmoj faritaj en Esperanto. Ĉu ni komencu?
Kiel vi, Jacob? How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me, Aaron. This is a blast.
Yeah, I enjoy doing this show a lot. You know, there's over 2 million Esperanto speakers or Esperantists worldwide, so it's good to know that we have a dedicated audience. I expect every one of them is, of course, listening to this show. So, danken askokantoy. Thank you, listeners. Well, I've been looking forward to this episode because the subject of our study today, is a spooky film, spookema filmo, about devils and curses, diabloi kai malbenoi. But this film might be Incubo. It might be cursed itself. Ooh, and we can talk about that.
I like that, yeah.
We might get to that a little later. But first, the answer to our trivia question from last week. We are, of course, talking about the 1940 Charlie Chaplin classic, The Great Dictator. And our trivia question was, what does the sign on the wall say when the barber and the soldier are getting hit in the head with a frying pan? And the answer is Restauracis, which is, of course, restaurant. And I think user Potofumanto42 on Twitter had the correct answer. So thank you. We'll DM you about your prize. Gratuloin. Congratulations. Well, let's talk about our film selection today. We watched the 1966 underground film Incubus, starring William Shatner and Allison Ames. Or at least I think we did. This is a weird movie. It feels kind of like...
it's not really a movie you watch. It's more a movie you sort of let wash over you.
Yeah, you get through it and experience it and come out the other side, hopefully stronger.
Right.
I remember... let's talk about you. When did you first hear about the film?
All I knew was that it was this kind of the lost film sort of thing, and it had William Shatner in it. I knew he'd done at least one other film in Esperanto, but... just kind of an odd thing with this sort of, strange cult following actor,
Yeah, I had always heard that it was the only or the first Esperanto, all Esperanto language film, which of course is not true. Angoroi or Agonies, which we covered on episode 7, it was the first one in 1964, but that's totally lost, and this one was lost for a long time. So I'd always heard that it was, sort of the premiere, if you can say that, Esperanto film, and then also it was lost and nobody could find it. So I'd never really seen it, and we'll talk about how it sort of came back to the public as we go on here, but it always sort of hung out there like. Yeah, and then, of course, it helps that it's got this sort of foreboding title. It's Incubus. It's like, whoa, boy, this sounds like a serious situation.
Right. It's something that is a little bit spooky, and I think, there was some sort of controversies about the making of it. Like they had to lie to the, the monastery where they were filming about what the content was so that they could get the actual place to let them be there.
Yes.
They knew they wouldn't let him do it if there was, monsters or, devils in it. So
yeah, I don't know what our listeners' particular beliefs are, but if you lie to a bunch of priests and monks about getting your movie made, maybe that explains where your misfortune comes from later.
Right.
The movie was, of course, conceived and created by Leslie Stevens, the creator and executive producer for The Outer Limits. Are you an Outer Limits fan?
I've only seen bits and pieces, but what I've seen, I've enjoyed for the most part. It's interesting.
That's another one of those things where I love The Outer Limits, and of course it's come back, and been sort of rebooted several times, but it's never enjoyed quite the cachet that Twilight Zone has. But for my money, like Outer Limits is really, I love the Twilight Zone, but it really goes places that the Twilight Zone won't. I mean, there's a reason it was only on TV for like 2 years, back in the early 60s. Right. And it really gets into like sci-fi and really weird stuff. And this is not like an original pick, but my favorite episode would probably be Demon with a Glass Hand, the one with the Harlan Ellison script. And of course, Robert Culp is in it, and he's really great in that. Beyond Outer Limits and Incubus, Stevens was a prolific writer and director, and he worked on Buck Rogers in the 25th Century,
Very cool.
And the TV show takes a thief. And according to some sources, he wrote the pilot script for the original Battlestar Galactica, for which he was the pilot for Battlestar Galactica. Yeah, and he was a producer as well. So I'm guessing that he came up with the concept, and Glenn A. Larson added all the Mormon references later.
Okay, yeah.
There's a lot of strong Mormon references in Battlestar, but we'll leave that to our friends at the Cast of Mormon to unravel. And also, Stevens was a film producer and writer and wrote a couple different films, too. And he wrote Incubus right after, Outer Limits was canceled in 1965. So I think this was kind of his idea to all right, what's my parachute look like? What color is it? Where am I going to go now? Let's try making a weird sort of film that would appeal to the underground or art scene. I don't know how you feel about the look of this movie. Of course, it's made in 1965, came out in 1966, so it's in black and white. But the cinematography was by Conrad Hall, who also worked with him on The Outer Limits. And he became a pretty successful Hollywood cinematographer.
That's correct. Yeah, there's a couple. I don't know how into the film world you are, but as somebody who studied film, there are a few gels and things that are kind of like his gels, like things that people used on his sets and became things he wanted.
Okay.
So
give me the Conrad Hall number 57 there for this one.
Right. Yeah. So there's a couple things that are kind of, iconic things he established in the film crew world.
And he went on to win 3 Academy Awards for Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid, American Beauty, and Road to Perdition. So he was still working, for a long time.
Yeah.
And what I thought was fascinating to me is that he was assisted on the film in an uncredited role by William A. Fraker, who himself was a legendary cinematographer in the film world. Mm-hmm. And as far as I could tell, this was Fraker's first film. So what a start. But he does go on in his career to work on films like Rosemary's Baby, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and many, many, many films throughout his career until he died in 2010. The composer of the film, who's composing some of this creepy sort of atmospheric music, was Dominic Frontier, who also worked on The Outer Limits. Looks like Stevens was sort of bringing a lot of people with him to this new film opportunity. And I guess ultimately the reason that they decided to make this be in Esperanto, except other than to give us the most high-profile Esperanto film, is that him and producer Anthony Taylor wanted to give it an otherworldly feel. And also they thought, and remember, 2 million Esperantists, but I guess they thought maybe misguidedly that it would appeal to a larger audience if it had this lingua franca, if you will.
Right. I think, the Esperanto had a sort of cult popularity following then that it doesn't really now. We don't really hear about it all that much. It's just, unfortunate, of course.
There are millions of us. Millions.
Right. But,
two. Two.
In terms of popular culture, it's not something that's talked about in the same way. I think if somebody, in Hollywood was making an Esperanto film these days, I'm sure they'd have a really hard time finding a budget.
But, that's true.
This thing was certainly small budget for the time. It's $125,000 roughly, which is, a little less than $1 million in today dollars.
Yeah.
So even today, the smallest Hollywood movies are, in the neighborhood of, 5 to 10 million.
Yeah. You could crowdfund an amazing YouTube Red show or movie, though, in Esperanto. Just saying, listeners. And it's funny because I don't really know Taylor's background going before the Outer Limits or Incubus. And I know that Stevens was, a Hollywood guy, but it does I'm going to say some good things coming up, but I will say that the film does have a kind of amateurish feel to it. I mean, it's only 78 minutes long,
right.
Which is just like a really long Outer Limits episode, basically.
Yeah.
And like you said, there wasn't a lot of financing. And so I feel like who knows what would have happened if there was more money and they were allowed to let it run a little longer.
To kind of add to that idea, I think, there's a lot of stuff in this movie that did feel a little bit like filler in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
I think, you said it is like a long Outer Limits episode, and I think that's very true. I think if you squeezed it into an hour-long slot rather than the 78 minutes, I think you'd still get the vast majority of the story, and you'd have no problems with following what was going on. I think it would be smoother.
Yeah.
Granted, our attention spans are shorter these days, but
Yeah.
Even for then, compare it to some of the TV shows at the time, and you would see something with a little bit smoother pacing than this had.
Yeah, and as a writer, I don't mean to drag Stevens here, but I think if he had leaned into the more artistic elements, it might have worked as well. Because a lot of times you can get a movie that is described as atmospheric or deliberate that has less dialogue. And I've heard this maybe very optimistically called Bergmanesque, in that you do have some of those shots where there is no dialogue, and we just see, for instance, the very chilling sort of shots of the beach, rolling, the waves rolling over the dead bodies, of these men who have been drowned and killed before. So I don't know if I would quite go Bergmanesque on that. Maybe it's just my love of chilly blondes that would make me think that it's Bergmanesque. But those elements are there. Well, let's we can talk about the plot of the film, or the specifics of the film in a bit, and also the curse, the Malbenoi that I mentioned before. But let's give a rundown, the listeners a rundown of what happens in this film exactly.
This is taking place in the village of Nomentum, which is, and there's kind of this, intertitle, sort of like long subtitle, sort of, and like a narration that's explaining, this is a village that has a magic well that can heal the sick, and it can maybe like make your give you some kind of cosmetic enhancements in the face, make you more sexy, just in more flowery words, as it were.
Maybe commentary on L.A. Hollywood culture.
Right. Yeah. The Fountain of Youth is in this little town on the coast.
Right.
And then we get to see this young woman who's kind of seducing this man who is going to the well to try and enhance his appearance, and he thinks he's this is going to grant him the sexiness powers he needs to seduce her, and it turns out she's just going to murder him.
Right.
So,
and we get the idea that this is not a great guy too. Like he seems,
right. Yeah.
Like a real bore. B-O-O-R.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you for the clarification on the spelling there. And then we get to see them, the two succubus, which are Kaya and Amael. Is that right?
Yeah.
They're kind of talking about, they're trying to, lure these men to their deaths, or, seduce them to darkness, as it were.
Yeah. And I love that it's just taken for granted that, sure, there's a narrator that kind of explains things a little, but it's just taken for granted that, there's succubi on this island. That's just the way it goes.
Right.
And then also I love the commitment of the movie to this moral inversion where they talk about, they're basically like nuns, but for Satan. They talk about it, although Satan's never called out. They talk about this god of darkness, and they have all these sort of unholy catechisms that they sort of do. And it's not there is no real explanation of that. We're just, you buy that, and then we just move on, and that's the world of the thing here. There's a healing well, and there's succubi ladies hanging around.
Absolutely, yeah. One thing that kind of surprised me about it is like they make a big deal out of this well at the beginning of the movie, and then like 15 minutes in, it's just gone forever. Never comes back at all.
Doesn't even pay like any role in the end, or we never really even get a confirmation on whether it works or not. The film shifts from there to follow Mark, played by William Shatner, who's like a wounded soldier coming back from an unspecified war, and his sister Arndis, played by Ann Atmar, that he lives with. And we don't know. Like, we assume that he's wounded, he's getting healing from the well, but is it psychosomatic? We don't know how badly he was wounded or how long ago it was.
Right.
That's never really played up on. Yeah,
and it's very much established through, expository dialogue rather than, showing, he's hurt, or, he's, you can see the wear and tear of being a soldier upon him. It's just, yes, I was a soldier and I was hurt. It's just explained in the dialogue. Yeah, he is frustrating.
Walking stick. Yeah, he's got a walking stick that he has for maybe 2 scenes, and then they throw it away, and then he doesn't need it anymore.
Then they kind of you know, Kaya decides she's going to try and, you know, seduce Mark, William Shatner, and she's seeing it as this like new sort of challenge where, you know, he's pure of heart and that will make it harder to do this. But if she can sway him, then that's like an achievement. Yeah. But they become, you know, attracted to each other, and Mark is, you know, wanting to get married first, which is a little ambiguous with the dialogue. Doesn't really outright say it. It's just kind of, you know, that same flowery, poetic sort of odd dialogue about, you know, well, I'm trying to think of the exact line, but it's not coming to me.
It's something. Well,
she's like, we have to do it the right way, or
right, yeah,
you know,
yeah,
something like that. And it's just like, okay, whatever that means. Like, it's not
for...
very clear. Maybe the right way is like, you know, let's go dance under a tree and then we can have sex.
Right.
That means nothing.
Yeah. Because for her, she's sick of like bagging these horrible like old men. So, you know, this girl wants a promotion. Yeah. She figures if she can corrupt a good soul, then she'll be doing real good. And you're right. Like for a film that, I mean, this is only 1965, but that in a lot of ways is trying to be really transgressive. And I think it gets real close to what it wants to do near the end of the film, you know, which we'll talk about in a second. It is kind of coy, and I think it fits for Mark's character because it's clear that he is immediately taken by the beautiful Kia, but he's like, well, you know how this works. Like, you know, we get married and then we can do what we want. And she's like, no, let's go to the beach. You know, we'll run around naked. And he's like, well, you know, we've got to go get married, and then we can give ourselves to each other. Yeah, it is strangely chaste, but I think that plays into the character of Mark.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah, right. Although, I mean, if Kia is like really, you know, a succubi, I don't know why she just doesn't go full hog and like tears all her clothes off or something. It's like, all right, do you want this or not? Forget putting a ring on it. Let's do this. Yes.
There's also a bit in there about where she tries to seduce like a priest, and he's like, he like turns his cross around at one point and like signifies he's not pure either, so she doesn't want to do that. Yeah. So she kind of has this sort of quest to find him, it's very ambiguous. It's mostly just like, you know, these kind of there's like two establishing shots and then like two close-up shots, one of her and one of this clergyman, but there's no dialogue or anything. It doesn't really. It's very vague.
Yeah, this might be one of those scenes that when Leslie Stevens was trying to get permission to shoot. Most of the film was shot, I think, in like Monterey County in New York, in California, and when they were trying to get permission to shoot at these different locations. One of the places that they wanted to shoot was at the Mission of San Antonio de Padua in the area. And he knew that, like you said, this is not a film that like the clergy would want to be shot in their locations. So he told like the guys in charge of the monastery that the film was called Religious Leaders of Old Monterey. And he showed them the script, which was in Esperanto. So I'm assuming they couldn't read it. But like, but the stage directions, which, you know, would be for the crew, were in English and involved like the monks and the farmers and stuff. So this is maybe one of those scenes where it's like, okay, so a priest is doing something. Yeah, sure. You can shoot your movie in our church. No problem. And it's funny that you mentioned that the scene was about her not wanting to seduce that guy because he doesn't seem pure. That's a really good interpretation. The way that I looked at it was that for her, that was encouragement to try to seduce somebody that was holy, because she was seeing that, you know, all my sisters, my succubus sisters, are afraid of the holy, but they're just like us. Like there are chinks in their armor, so I can go after somebody. But yeah, that was a really weird kind of scene that I think we talk about like sex and violence as being transgressive, but would be kind of transgressive, I think, for the mid-60s.
Oh, absolutely.
He didn't turn it upside down,
yeah.
though. He only turned it around, like, Jesus, look away. Yeah.
Right.
We haven't even got to the sister yet.
Yes, that's true.
Which she doesn't really do much in the film, but yeah.
This is true. Yeah.
Mark lives with his sister named Arndis, who supports him, it seems like, after he's been wounded in war. And there's this strange scene in the film, and I'm interested in your sort of interpretation of what it might represent. But while Mark and Kia are flirting basically and just talking about their lives, an eclipse happens. And Mark mentions specifically, don't look at the eclipse. You could go blind. It's bad news. And then he goes off with Kia to run in the river or whatever. And Arndis comes out and just looks right at the eclipse like a dummy and goes blind after that, or at least has her sight severely impaired. And she's worried after that because, of course, Mark has been taken away by Kia. And so she ends up wandering around the island, never making it to the well to drink from the well. So we never get to test the healing powers of the well. That could have helped out again. But no well after the beginning of the film.
Right. In terms of like interpretation, what I sort of feel like there might be some sort of inclination towards is this, idea of sort of, these sort of vagary things that are, you're forbidden to do this as part of your, religious tasks, or this is something that is prohibited as part of our culture, and sort of like, the punishment for that, which is kind of a running theme throughout the movie. That's kind of what I expected them to be getting. I just don't think that was carried out very well.
Like an original sin type metaphor.
Yeah, something like that. But it's kind of what I'm guessing they're going for. But that's it just wasn't very clear. Yeah, it was more of a I kind of assumed that it was something that was done so that this they wanted to show a separation between Mark and Arndis at that point in the film, like, she's going to drive them apart from each other, their family apart, and that's part of the corruption process. And they just didn't have an easily accessible way to do that. They wanted to do something artsy instead.
Yeah.
So
artsy is a watchword for this film for sure.
Yes.
And also gives the other character, Amael, something to actually do, because she comes upon Arndis when she's blind, and basically she's worried about this plan because she also knows, and this is also part of the moral inversion, that as an audience we should be worried that Mark will be corrupted towards evil, but the evil people are worried about being corrupted towards good, which I felt like that was kind of a neat sort of setup.
Right.
And so we haven't got to the part where so Mark prevails upon Kia that they should be married so that they can really enjoy each other, and they fall asleep, I guess, as you would on a sort of lazy summer day, and he picks her up and he carries her to the church, intending to marry her when she awakens. And she does awaken, and you get those. Nobody ever says like vampire in this movie, but I feel like a lot of those aspects are here, because she awakens in the church, and it's like, she sees the cross and the holy sacraments and everything, and it's bad news. It's bad news.
In regards to that, like, vampire comment, there's something that I noticed that I think is interesting. They're both of the succubus costumes. They have these little kind of like pointed collar things that run around the back of their heads.
Oh yeah,
and it's kind of those little points that stick off right where the ear should be. You know. I thought that was interesting. It was a neat little design, one of the more
sinister touch.
Original.
Yeah,
just like just that little sinister touch. I just feel like that trope is used so often with like the negative stereotype, whether it's devil or vampire or monster or whatever it is.
Right.
But like there are a lot of like good creatures in mythology that have pointed ears as well, in terms of like elves or like gnomes and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah.
It'd be really cool if there was something in pop culture where we had a hero with pointed ears. I think that would be really cool.
Yeah, I agree. This is the point where the movie takes a weird turn, and it certainly goes barreling towards its end after this.
Yes. They start exhausting their budget rapidly.
Absolutely. They really commit to this kind of moral inversion I talked about before, because it's at this point that Kia runs back to her sister Amael, and says that she has basically, like, they call it holy rape. In the film, like she has been, violated and assaulted by Mark in him trying to bring her to a church, and so they plot their revenge. And you almost feel like there ought to be like three succubi at this point,
right,
like the three witches or three weird women,
right? Absolutely,
yeah. But again, budget, and so they decide that they're going to summon the Incubus. which they do in a scene that is short, and of course the budget is still a problem, but I felt like, was successfully creepy for what they had to go with.
Right. They start using lights at this point in the movie as well. The rest of it is basically all, just like daylight.
Yeah, or night for day later on, yeah.
Right,
or day for night, yeah.
But they start doing a lot of, like theatrical lighting, and they have like fog machines, and they're like, actual sets and not just, like inside building or outside building type stuff.
Right.
Which they probably could have gotten anywhere, to be honest.
Right, yeah.
So, I think they're starting to do a little bit more with that. We also get some camera moves. Like early on, it's basically just like, stationary or, slowly panning tripod shots.
Yeah.
We start to get a few camera moves as we get closer to the end.
Yeah, it's neat. And I thought that the appearance of what I assumed to be the god of darkness was kind of cool. They have some kind of puppet or something, which is, backlit, and then we see the shadow of it in the fog from the fog machine, which, at that point you can have a normal-sized puppet and it looks really big, and it's sort of looming behind this broken or ruined structure where they summon the Incubus from. And so that was cool. And the guy pops out of the ground in a practical effect. That always works if you can get an actor to get in a hole in the ground.
Yeah.
And our titular character has emerged. And he's a bad guy.
Yeah.
We don't really learn anything about him other than
this is true.
He is just a
kind of
force of destruction and evil. Yeah, he is a
malevolently zombies his way towards the characters and hoping to defile or murder them.
And I'm never really sure what the plot is. If they just, I know that they want to destroy Mark, and they've given up on seduction. They just want to kill him, but in the kind of Shakespearean way of revenge, they want to make sure that he is. He's unshriven, he's not, he's sinned. And so when he dies, he'll go to hell. So it's a timing situation. And to do that, they sick the Incubus on the sister, Arndis, and he attacks and rapes and murders her in a very chilling sort of sequence. After which Mark comes back and they fight, and Mark kills, I think, the Incubus, or at least stabs him and believes that he's killed him. And at that point, I think that we're supposed to get that Kia is conflicted over what she's done, but it's a little underwritten. It's a little uncertain. Yeah.
I think she says something about like she makes the sign of the cross and says something about belonging to, the god of brightness or something like that.
Right.
To kind of counteract her position before. Right. And there's kind of this ambiguous ending.
Oh, the ending, yeah.
Yeah, it's very strange.
Yeah.
I think it was kind of weak. I feel like, the filmmaker in me says that the ending, if they wanted to make their point, stronger at the end, would be to then have their wedding, next to the well. Right. Like bring that back at the beginning, because that's like the whole inciting incident. That would be kind of a nice little, story frame thing, but they really just give you nothing at the end. They're just like, well, whatever should logically happen after this, we're not going to show you. Like,
yeah, it's ambiguous. Yeah, it's again, arty is the real watchword. And I do like the fact, although I'm kind of conflicted, because in an art film like this, especially when you don't have any studio oversight, you tend to just kind of, what you described would work perfectly, although it's kind of a Hollywood ending. And tend to get the steer away from that. So like the real bummer ending would be Mark dies either at the hands of the Incubus or just of his wounds, and Kia's brought back into the fold of evil and probably punished for what she's done, and like the Lord of Darkness reigns over all. You see that in films like Manos Hands of Fate, which is like, what are you even trying to do with this movie? Like, it's not even an end. And I don't like, the propensity towards Hollywood endings, but at the same time, story structure, come on. But the end of this film is, Mark makes it back to the church, and it's ambiguous as to whether, I think we can feel that his soul is safe, but it's ambiguous as to whether he's going to live or not. And Kia, like you said, she does declare her allegiance, or at least her intention to follow the Lord of Brightness after this. At which point the Incubus turns into a freaking goat.
Yes.
And just like mauls her, basically. And then you've got this. You were talking about camera moves before. We get this whole handheld scene where the goat is just, I think,
going
attacking
nuts.
her.
Yeah.
I don't really want to think about what else could be going on. And she struggles and breaks away somehow, and then gets back into the church with Mark. And yeah, like you said, that's fine. That's pretty much it.
Right. I think I liked the goat thing. I almost wish, like, it's a good reveal at that moment, but, like, I almost wish that had been, the actor had been in the goat costume the whole time, because, like, I think it would have sold the creepy factor a little more, especially in some of those early shots, and, like, I thought that would have been cool. I wish that they had done that.
Yeah, not until the Witch in 2015 would a black goat be used to such great effect. This film premiered at the San Francisco Film Festival in 1966, and the Esperanto enthusiasts in the audience, reportedly 50 to 100 people, did not enjoy the film's use and execution of Esperanto, calling it laughable and the pronunciation bad. I wouldn't call myself such an expert to rate other people's pronunciations, but I could see that criticism. Apparently, the actors had about 10 days, I think, to sort of rehearse and learn their lines, and they were just kind of doing them by rote, phonetically.
Right,
it
but
there
was but supposedly there was nobody there to, like, adjust pronunciation.
Oh, they didn't have a coach.
Set.
Okay,
which makes sense. Low budget.
Yeah, right, exactly. Apparently, due to the sort of impenetrable nature of the dialogue, and also a couple scandals involving cast members, which we'll talk about in a minute.
Yes.
The film could only find distribution in France. And apparently the French liked it. Go figure. I guess that art thing worked out. In 1993, producer Taylor attempted to create a VHS release, but he was told by the company that stored the negative print that a fire had destroyed all the prints of the film. So he thought he was out of luck. But it turned out there's a copy archived in the collection of the Cinémathèque Française in Paris. Mm-hmm. And this was the French release. So he got his hands on it, and it turns out it was not in very good condition, and it had French subtitles, like hard-coded on the film.
Right.
So the Sci-Fi Channel, of all places, funded a restoration of the print, and they just superimposed English subtitles over the French ones, and the film eventually got a DVD release in 2001. And I find it ironic that a film that uses a language that was created to erase the barriers between cultures would first only be readable in French and now can only be read in English. What if there were no titles? Do you think that this film would be apprehendable without any subtitles at all?
I mean,
do the words really add anything to how? To
I feel like you wouldn't get it until near the end when, like, there's the goat monster. They're kind of malevolent, but you don't really get that they're
like evil spirits.
You don't get that they're succubus until somebody says that.
Yeah,
because, like, they're not. Like when I envision a succubus from, like, mythology and general cultural
your D&D
depiction.
Stuff.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, it's nothing like what we saw on screen. Much more, dominatrix plus devil sort of thing.
Right. Yeah. That's part of their charm and their allure, is that they seem so innocent.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I feel like time has been kinder than the initial audiences were, because this film does show a 71% rating on Rotten Tomatoes amongst critics. Yes.
Wow, that's high. That's too high.
I mean, it's not a perfect film in any way. Yeah. It has a rather motley cast. William Shatner is good, if a little stiff, as Mark. Mm-hmm. Shatner, of course, had been a mainstay in TV guest roles in the 50s and 60s. And he was, interestingly, in the famous Richard Matheson written and Richard Donner directed episode of The Twilight Zone, Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, which is the There's Something on the Wing one.
Yes.
He was also in an episode of The Outer Limits called Cold Hands, Warm Heart. So that's probably where Stevens sort of got onto him. And in the mid-'60s, he had a few recurring roles on lawyer and doctor shows until his appearance in Incubus. But his really big break came in, you guessed it, 1975, when he starred as Jeff Cable in the TV series Barbary Coast. And of course,
okay.
that didn't last for long, but it was a role I think that showed a lot of his range of potential. And from there, he'd go on to find success with T.J. Hooker in the early 80s and hosting Rescue 911 in the 90s. And of course, the Priceline.com spokesman.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of Miss Congeniality as well.
Yes, of course.
I think that was probably one of my favorite, more recent roles that I've seen him in.
Yeah, he's great in that, and also it's great because it plays on his sort of cultural cachet and his the fact that he is a star.
Mm-hmm.
And he's still kicking around today. You should follow him on Twitter. He's a real hoot.
Definitely.
What did you think of his performance in the film?
I think it's pretty good. It's not amazing or anything.
Yeah.
I would say out of all the performers there, I think, our star is Kaya, really. It's not Shatner. It's not Arndis or Incubus or Amael.
Sure.
I think her
Kaya,
performance...
played by Allison Ames.
Correct. Yeah, I think her performance was the strongest in terms of the subtlety and sort of subtext in what she was saying versus how she was reacting to things happening.
Yeah.
But, in Shatner, his style is very much sort of, direct. It's how do I describe it? It's like a focused beam of acting. It's like,
sure.
Oh, the acting is over here. I will beam at this now.
Sure,
oh, the acting is over here now. Let me focus on my acting this way. It doesn't really.
It's like he's laser focused.
Yeah, he doesn't have like this sense of space the way that other actors do. He just kind of focuses in on one particular small thing or moment, and that is the whole moment for him.
I think he communicates fairly well, mostly because I think that he really learned this script well, like in terms of handling the dialogue. There were no real pauses in the way that he delivered his lines. I felt like he was very solid, and like I said, maybe he was not given the chance to, or maybe he didn't have the confidence to really let it rip. But yeah, I mean, he's the hero. He's the male ingenue. So what are we supposed to expect from him? I liked your comments about Allison Ames. I think that she did do a great job. She had a career mostly in TV in the 60s, but she pretty much disappears after Incubus. She herself appeared in 2 episodes of The Outer Limits. And in one of them, I thought this was interesting, her character's name was Arndis.
Interesting.
So that is a name that Leslie Stevens recycled. He also recycled her into being his wife in 1965. They were married soon after the production of this, but they divorced a year later in 1966.
Interesting.
Yeah. Speaking of Arndis, Ann Atmar played the sister Arndis. Atmar was an actress and model, and, she's only got a few credits to her name that I could find. But here's the sad part, and where we start thinking about whether or not this film is cursed. She committed suicide only a few weeks after the completion of the film.
Oh, geez.
Yeah.
That's really too bad.
And I don't think anybody, like I said, her sort of a public awareness and her cachet wasn't very high, so I don't even really know what was going on. All I know is that she wasn't around after that. Eloise Hart plays Amel, the other sister of Kia, and she has had guest appearances on TV, a handful of movie roles in the 60s and 70s. I think she has a very brief role in Kentucky Fried Movie, if you've seen that film.
I have not.
She plays a political commentator who sort of comedically makes a point by flipping the bird at her conservative opponent. Continuing this strange theme of tragedy with the film, her daughter, Marina Elizabeth, was kidnapped and murdered in 1968.
Oh, jeez.
A couple years after the film was completed. The crime was never solved, but it was speculated that she may have been one of the victims of the Manson family, who would later murder Sharon Tate and the LaBiancas at their homes, which were just a few miles away.
That's messed up.
As a total weird coincidence, Tate and her boyfriend, Roman Polanski, did attend the film premiere of Incubus.
Wow.
All tragedy aside, I can imagine him sitting in the audience and being like, I could have thought of that. Oh, that's a good idea. Maybe I can use that for something else.
It does have a little bit of that Polanski vibe.
Yeah. And that's being very kind. And finally we come to the actor behind the Incubus, Milos. And this is a strange story. Milos was a street fighter in his native Serbia, as you are. And he met French film superstar Alain Delon when Delon was shooting a film there. And apparently Delon hired him as a bodyguard because, it seems like a tough guy. And Milos eventually moved to Hollywood, where he pursued an career as an actor and as a street fighter. He continued to street fight in L.A.
Yep.
He was in The Russians Are Coming before Incubus, and Incubus was his last film role, mainly because he was found dead in Mickey Rooney's house in early 1966. Apparently, he was having an affair with Rooney's then estranged wife, Carolyn Mitchell, and apparently killed her and then himself in a murder-suicide.
Yeah. Ooh.
Yeah. So it would be really hard to not to try to deny the idea that I don't really believe in this sort of thing, but it all lines up. It's something weird is going on with this film.
Yeah. I mean, it could just be that, it put some of these folks in a bad headspace and, that's something that really affects you in the long run. There's lots of stories of method actors, doing crazy stuff when they're method acting. And I don't think that, something like this would be that far, but particularly with like Milos, that would be, something that I could see because he's very much feeling that character in a lot of ways in his performance. I don't think it's, too far of a stretch to say that he's trying his best to really embody that rather than perform that. In a lot of ways.
A method actor. Yeah, for sure. I would never lay that at the. I mean, it's not speaking Esperanto. It wasn't that experience that would drive this cast to do that. If anything, that would broaden their experiences and help them. But it's really strange. And of course, it was a tumultuous period. I mean, some of these things like. Nobody can plan for being in the crosshairs of the Mansons. I mean, I don't really know what you can do about that, but
this is true.
It's just weird. It's just weird and tragic. I think it was interesting that this village, I'm just kind of digging into the script and some of Leslie Stevens' ideas, that this village has this reputation for a healing well, but it itself is also a hunting ground for demons and succubi. Like, we never really test the veracity of the healing waters. Although there was a fun little scene where I think Kaya is sort of throwing a tantrum or a fit over frustration, and she's following Mark, looking for a place to seduce him. And as she goes by the well, she like throws like a rock or like she throws something in it, like stupid well.
Yeah.
But there's like this, the sort of juxtaposition or the dichotomy of like this. If you've got this holy, like amazing element, you're going to have this sort of dark element to sort of pay the price of something like that.
Yeah. And to be fair, the more religious you are, the more demons you will see, regardless of whether they're there.
Interesting. As we kind of wrap up here, did you have any thoughts that you left unsaid about the film or anything else you wanted to explore?
I think about that.
As you think about it, I just wanted to mention that going with the vampire sort of theme that we mentioned before, when Mark stabs the Incubus in the chest with a knife, he falls down dead. And then for the plan to continue, Amel has to sort of bring him back to life. And so she pulls the knife out and he gets back up again. So it's kind of like a vampire being staked. Like he's dead as long as the thing is in his heart. But when you pull it out, it's like, whoop, he's right back up.
Yeah, that's interesting. I would say like some of the things that I remember best from this movie are not like dialogue moments or interactions between characters, but like some of the sort of like odd choices for cinematography. There's a few things where like we see characters, walking through like a window frame around them, and like there's the shot that you mentioned before with our first scene with the Incubus. Some of those moments of like cinematography, I think, are fairly iconic and interesting. They're showing some real creative ingenuity that I think is valuable.
There's a few moments.
I just wish it was like tilted more towards a direct purpose.
Right. I mean, even in 65 or 66, I'm guessing that some of these things, these sort of tropes that you see in art films had to be fairly well established. Like there's a part where the two sisters are talking and one is like looking forward, to the camera or off camera, and the other one is looking, to the side to frame right, and it's like that classic, a perfume commercial kind of pose, but that I'm sure appeared, in the 50s or 40s in Bergman films. So they're definitely drawing on that language here to create their quote unquote art movie. Yeah.
There's also one scene earlier where Amael and Kaya are conversing, and it's basically just a switch back and forth between two over-the-shoulder shots, but it's framed really low, so like their mouths are hidden behind each other's shoulders.
Yeah.
On that, and like part of me wonders if like that's an artistic choice, like the things they're talking about are taboo or something.
Sure.
But part of me also wonders like maybe they only had budget for so much film, and this is kind of a long dialogue scene, so they just like redubbed over with whatever they wanted after they got it done.
Yeah, maybe the sounds at the beach at Big Sur were a little too loud for the audio guy, so they're like, we'll just ADR this part later.
So who knows?
I had thought that the fight scene between the Incubus and Mark was pretty good. It was it was short, but I thought it was kind of brutal and visceral for a 60s movie. And I thought Shatner did a good job in that. He fights the Incubus at one point with like a brand, like a torch. He's got a stick that's on fire, and there's a couple scenes where he's holding it fairly close to his face in the way that I think a young actor would be like, yeah, let's do this. And an older actor would be like, I'm not doing that. Forget about that. The enthusiasm of youth can lead to singed eyebrows. But yeah, it was pretty good. I think that he probably should have thrown in maybe some kicks, or some body blows or something like that. But he does eventually prevail against.
No fight choreo in that set.
That's right, yeah. Well, there's one character, just leading into our vocab question for this week. There's one character that we haven't dug into in Incubus, and that's the black goat that the Incubus transforms into. We will, of course, never know the name of the animal performer, but if we were to describe a black goat in Esperanto, what would we say? If you know the answer, you can tweet to us at Castperanto on Twitter. The first correct answer, gets you a free month trial of Rosetta Stone's Esperanto software. So get cracking, listeners. Let's see. Next week on Castperanto, we're taking a look at what's been called one of the most inventive and weird comic books of the last decade, and one that's been a huge influence and inspiration in the indie comics market, and it's one that uses a little Esperanto. It's Saga from Brian K. Vaughan and Image Comics, so stay tuned for that next week. Saga on the show. Jacob, you'll be back next week?
Sure, absolutely.
Awesome. And listeners, like we said, you can tweet to us at Castperanto on Twitter, or you can email us at castperanto@gmail.com. Thanks for joining us on Castperanto, the Esperanto Media Podcast. And until next time, Gis.
Adios.
Tis la bella songgio del